In the cold, historic city of Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, Anatoly Moskvin was known as a man of intellect, an eccentric but brilliant historian and linguist. His neighbors saw him as a quiet academic, a recluse who spent most of his time wandering cemeteries, buried in his research. Anatoly Moskvin was born on September 1st, 1966, in Gorky, Russia, now Nizhny Novgorod. From an early age, he stood out as highly intelligent, but deeply introverted. His parents, Elvira and Yuri Moskvin, were both respected professionals. His mother was a teacher, and his father worked as a research engineer. But despite their stable home life, Moskvin struggled to form friendships, preferring books over people. His childhood was punctuated by bizarre behaviors that, in hindsight, hinted at his macabre destiny. He was obsessed with burial rituals, folklore, and the afterlife. While other children played outside, Anatoly spent his time reading about ancient civilizations, mummification, and magic. At age 13, Moskvin had an experience that he later claimed would define his entire existence. While walking home from school, he was stopped by a group of mourners dressed in black. They were attending the funeral of an 11-year-old girl, Natasha Petrova. A grieving relative forced Moskvin to kiss the dead girl's face, telling him it was a required ritual for marriage in the afterlife. As he later recounted in an interview,
"An adult pushed my face down to the waxy forehead of the girl in an embroidered cap. I kissed her once, then again, then again. The girl's mother then put a wedding ring on my finger and one on Natasha's. My strange marriage with the dead girl was useful. It led to my real passion, cemeteries and the dead."
After that incident, Moskvin became convinced that the dead could be brought back to life. He became obsessed with the idea that souls lingered near their bodies, waiting for someone to resurrect them. As a teenager, Moskvin spent hours wandering cemeteries, studying tombstones, burial practices, and decomposition. He even slept on graves, believing it would allow him to communicate with the dead. But as the years passed, his interest grew more extreme. By adulthood, he was regarded as a brilliant but deeply eccentric scholar. He spoke over 13 languages, was an expert in Celtic history and occult rituals, and worked as a journalist and historian. The study of cemeteries was his specialty. He published numerous articles on graveyards, rituals, and the history of burial sites. Colleagues respected his work, but they noticed his unusual habits. He would refuse to shake hands, avoid physical contact, and always seemed to be in deep contemplation of something no one else could see. Then, sometime around 2005, he took his fascination one step further. Something inside Moskvin snapped. He was no longer satisfied with merely studying graves. He wanted companionship. That's when he began his darkest project, stealing the bodies of dead children and turning them into dolls. Moskvin specifically targeted the graves of young girls aged 3 to 15. He would scan local obituaries and study burial sites for suitable candidates. Many of the girls he selected had died tragically, from car accidents, illnesses, or even murders. After identifying a potential doll, he visited the grave several times before deciding to dig it up. He later claimed that he would speak to the spirits of the girls, waiting for them to give him permission to remove their bodies. Moskvin always worked at night, moving under cover of darkness. Armed with a shovel and rubber gloves, he would dig through the damp earth, careful not to attract attention. Once he reached the coffin, he broke it open and pulled the body out. Then, he carried the corpse home in plastic bags or suitcases. In total, Moskvin dug up at least 150 graves. though he only took 26 bodies home. Inside his small apartment, Moskvin began his transformation process. Step 1. Drying the bodies. He carefully dried out the corpses using a mixture of salt, baking soda, and a fan. This prevented decomposition and made the bodies more manageable. Step 2. Reinforcing the limbs. Many of the bodies were fragile, so he wrapped their arms and legs in cloth and padded them with rags to maintain their structure. Some had wooden supports inserted into their limbs so they wouldn't collapse. Step 3. Creating the doll-like appearance. He covered their faces with wax masks and painted doll-like features on them. He inserted glass eyes into their sockets, making them appear as if they were still alive. He dressed them in colourful children's clothes, often taken from toy stores or second-hand shops. He styled their hair with ribbons, headbands, and bows. Step 4. Giving them voices. Some of the dolls had musical boxes sewn into their chests so that when Moskvin pressed on them, they spoke or sang. Others contained motion sensors to make them appear responsive. For years, Moskvin lived among his dolls as if they were his children. He talked to them, watched cartoons with them, and even celebrated birthdays. He set up tea parties and made them play together. He claimed that they spoke to him in his dreams, begging to be saved. He believed that if he waited long enough, science would eventually find a way to bring them back to life. In 2011, police began investigating a series of grave desecrations across Nizhny Novgorod. Locals had noticed disturbed soil, open graves, and missing bodies. The trail led them to Anatoly Moskvin's apartment. When officers entered, they were overwhelmed by the stench of decay. What they saw horrified them beyond words. 26 mummified corpses, dressed as dolls, sat around the home. Birth certificates, newspaper clippings, and grave records filled the shelves. Open coffins and pieces of rotting wood littered the floor. Moskvin was arrested immediately. In 2012, Moskvin was declared insane and unfit for trial. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and sentenced to indefinite psychiatric confinement. His parents, who lived in the same apartment, claimed they never noticed anything unusual. To this day, Moskvin remains locked away in a psychiatric hospital, where he continues to insist that he meant no harm. He only wanted to give the girls a second chance at life. Anatoly Moskvin's story is one of the darkest and most twisted cases of grave robbing in modern history. To some, he was a madman with a delusional dream. To others, he was a monster who stole children from their graves. Either way, he remains one of Russia's most disturbing figures. Ultimately, Moskvin's story is a grim reminder of how untreated psychological trauma and extreme isolation can lead a person down a dark and dangerous path. It also raises important questions about mental health, the responsibilities of those around individuals with troubling behavior, and how society responds to such aberrations. While his intellectual brilliance couldn't mask the depth of his abnormalities, Moskvin's case challenges us to reflect on the human capacity for both empathy and horror.